The twilight air of early spring buzzed with the hum of insects and the sharp scent of new grass. A breeze rustled the leaves in the small patch of forest on the edge of Fairview, a quiet town nestled somewhere in the rolling hills of northern Georgia. It was the kind of place where people didn't lock their doors until recently, where football games filled Friday nights, and the woods were both playground and hiding spot for the restless hearts of its youth. The fading light filtered through the trees in streaks of gold and shadow. Perched on a low branch, barely visible to the average eye, was a young barred owl. Fluffier than an adult, with speckled feathers and oversized black eyes, the owlet had recently begun to stretch its wings in the dusky air. She was a curious thing, still learning the world, but quick to silence at any strange sound. Her instincts as sharp as her claws. Tonight, though, curiosity would be punished. "Dude, I swear I saw it land here," said Chase Morgan, 17 years old, sneakers already damp from tramping through underbrush. He held his phone flashlight like a weapon, sweeping it across the tangled undergrowth. "Yeah? You sure it's not just another rabbit?" muttered Tyler Griggs. He was taller, lean, and perpetually chewing gum like it was a nervous tick. "You always see stuff. Last week it was a bobcat." "I'm telling you, it was a freaking owl," Chase insisted. "Let's find it. Could be fun, like target practice." Behind them, laughing a little too loudly, was Brandon Tate, the third in the group. His laugh had a hollow edge, the kind that echoed more when you weren't really feeling it. "You guys ever, hit something for real? Like a bird? I mean, really hit it?" Chase smirked and raised the BB gun slung across his shoulder. "Plenty of times. Squirrels, birds, bottles, whatever. Tonight's gonna be different. You in, Brandon?" Brandon hesitated. He looked around the darkening woods. The air felt different tonight, heavier somehow. "Yeah," he muttered. "Whatever." They moved forward. Leaves cracked underfoot. The owl stayed still, her feathers blending seamlessly into the bark, her heartbeat quickening. Something in her young mind warned her, a flicker of danger. But she didn't fly. She was too new at this, too unpracticed in survival. "There!" Tyler shouted, pointing to the tree. The flashlight hit her like a spotlight. She froze. Chase didn't hesitate. The BB gun rose. A click. A breath. Pop. A high-pitched screech tore through the silence as the owlet tumbled off the branch. She hit the forest floor with a soft thud, wings splayed, body trembling. "Got it," Chase cheered. "Told you." Tyler laughed, and Brandon followed, a beat behind. But the laughter faded as they approached the fallen creature. Her tiny chest rose and fell quickly, one wing bent at an unnatural angle. Brandon crouched. "Dude, it's still alive." "So?" Chase said, already turning to reload. "Let's finish it. No point leaving it like that." Brandon stared. The owl's black eyes met his, wide with pain and confusion. There was no scream, no fight, just a quiet desperation, a plea he didn't understand but felt like a gut punch. "I think we should just go," Brandon said quietly. "What?" Tyler scoffed. "You serious? You're the one who wanted to see blood?" "Yeah, well, maybe I changed my mind." Chase raised an eyebrow. "Since when are you soft?" Brandon didn't answer. He stood up and brushed off his jeans, gaze still locked on the injured owl. "I'm leaving." Chase and Tyler exchanged glances. "Whatever, man," Chase said. "More fun for us." But Brandon had already turned and walked away, fast, almost running. He didn't stop until he reached his bike on the edge of the woods. His hands were shaking. Images of the owl's face flickered through his mind. He remembered how helpless it had looked, how wrong it had felt. 15 minutes later, Brandon was back. Flashlight in one hand, a beat-up shoebox in the other. He found her where they'd left her, barely breathing now. Her wing was clearly broken, and blood darkened her feathers. Brandon swallowed his fear and knelt down gently. "It's okay," he whispered. "I'm gonna fix this." He lined the shoebox with the inside of his hoodie and, as delicately as he could, lifted her inside. Her body trembled, but she didn't fight. The Wildlife Rescue Center was 30 minutes away, too far to bike at night. But his mom's car keys sat in a dish by the door, and she was already asleep. Brandon didn't think. He acted. By the time the headlights cut across the gravel lot of the Southern Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, the owl's breathing had slowed to a terrifying crawl. He banged on the door with the urgency of a boy trying to undo a sin too heavy for his age. A woman in scrubs opened it, eyes wary but alert. You've got to help her, Brandon said, his voice cracking. Please. We hurt her. I didn't mean to. I couldn't leave her like that. She looked at the box, then at him. Come in, she said. Brandon stepped inside the bright light, the door closing behind him. The night would never be the same again. The hallway of the Southern Wildlife Rehabilitation Center smelled faintly of antiseptic and pine cleaner. The lights overhead buzzed softly, and framed photos of rescued animals lined the cream-colored walls. Opossums, foxes, owls, and hawks, their eyes forever wide with some mix of wonder and trauma. Brandon barely noticed them. He stood just inside the front door, unsure whether to breathe or speak. The woman who opened the door moved quickly now, her voice clipped but calm. Put the box down on the counter, carefully, she instructed. Brandon obeyed, his fingers brushing against the owl's downy feathers one last time before stepping back. The woman gently peeled back the hoodie lining the box and drew in a sharp breath. A juvenile, she murmured. Barred owl. Maybe 10, 12 weeks. What happened? Brandon hesitated. He didn't want to say it, not just because he felt ashamed, but because saying it out loud made it real. We shot her, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Me and some friends, with a BB gun. I didn't know they'd actually... I didn't mean... The woman didn't interrupt. She simply kept examining the owl, running gentle fingers over the injured wing. You brought her here. That means something. She's gonna be okay, right? The woman paused. I don't know yet. Her wing is fractured. She's in shock. That much I can tell without x-rays. Internal injuries are a bigger question, but she's alive. You got her here in time. Brandon felt the tightness in his chest ease just slightly. What do you need me to do? She gave him a sharp look, one eyebrow raised. What's your name? Brandon. Brandon Tate. I'm 17. I'm Melissa, vet tech and night intake coordinator here. That means you just gave me my third emergency of the week. He flinched. Sorry. Melissa's expression softened a little. Sit there, she said, nodding to a chair near the wall. You look like you're going to pass out. I'll take her to the back and get her stabilized. You can wait if you want. Brandon nodded and dropped into the seat, hands on his knees. Melissa disappeared behind a swinging door, cradling the box like something sacred. Time warped after that. The wall clock ticked too loudly, the air felt thin, and Brandon's guilt circled his brain like vultures. He couldn't stop replaying it. The crack of the BB gun, the fall, the way her body had hit the ground with more silence than it should have. He hadn't even wanted to go out that night. Chase had texted him while he was still finishing dinner. Come on, man. Woods, BBs, beers, fun night. Brandon had agreed before thinking. That was always how it went. Do first, regret later. What kind of person shoots an owl? He'd never even been the worst of the three. Tyler had this gleam in his eye when they hurt something. Chase liked being in control, the leader. Brandon just followed. He was starting to think that made him worse. 30 minutes passed, then an hour. Finally, Melissa returned. She was wiping her hands on a towel and looked tired but calm. She's stable for now, she said. We wrapped the wing and got some fluids in her. She's sedated. Brandon stood up quickly. Is that good? It's the first step. We'll know more after x-rays in the morning. But she's got a fighting chance. She paused, studying him again. You stayed. I didn't want to leave her, Brandon said. Melissa tilted her head. Not everyone would have come back in the first place. He swallowed hard. I couldn't sleep knowing she was lying there like that. It just felt wrong. Melissa nodded slowly. That feeling? That's your conscience, Brandon. It's uncomfortable. And it's also what makes you human. Brandon didn't know what to say to that. He just sat back down, rubbing his palms over his jeans. I should call my mom, he said eventually. She's probably freaking out. Go ahead. The phone's right there. He made the call quickly, lying just enough to keep panic at bay. Said he was helping an injured animal and would be home soon. His mom didn't press, probably too tired to argue. He hung up and turned back to Melissa. Can I see her again before I go? Melissa considered. I'll allow it, but just for a moment. She led him through the swinging doors to a softly lit room that smelled of straw, iodine, and birds. The young owl lay in a small padded enclosure on a heating mat, her wing gently wrapped, her chest rising and falling in shallow but steady breaths. Brandon crouched by the glass. "She's beautiful," he whispered. Melissa nodded. Barred owls are nocturnal. They have a distinctive call, like, "Who cooks for you?" Ever heard it? I don't think so. You will. They're mysterious creatures, deeply intelligent. Most people never get this close. She looked at him again. "Do you want to help?" Brandon blinked. "What?" "I mean it. We're short on volunteers. You said you want to do something. We take young people sometimes, teach them how to care for injured wildlife. Most don't last long, but maybe you're different." He hesitated. "You'd really let me help after what I did?" "Only if you're ready to do the hard parts, cleaning cages, handling wounded animals, scrubbing floors, and more importantly, learning how to live with yourself." Brandon thought for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "I want to try." Melissa held out a clipboard. "Then fill this out. We'll talk again tomorrow after the vet sees her." Brandon took the clipboard and pen. For the first time in hours, the weight in his chest lightened. Not gone, but shifting. Like maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something he didn't deserve, but needed. Outside, the stars blinked in silence. The sun was just beginning to rise when Brandon finally crept back into his house. The old screen door gave a slight whine, and the wood floor creaked beneath his sneakers. The house was quiet, his mother's car still parked outside, meaning she hadn't left for work yet. He tiptoed down the hallway, his mind buzzing with too many thoughts and not enough rest. But even as guilt clung to him like morning fog, a strange clarity had begun to form. He had hurt something innocent, and now he had a choice: forget it and move on, or carry the weight and try to fix what little he could. Brandon pushed open his bedroom door, collapsed onto his bed fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours before sleep finally claimed him. By noon he was up again. He showered, changed, and tried to shake off the heaviness still pressing down on his shoulders. His mother, Lacey, was in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. She looked up as he walked in. "Rough night?" she asked. "You didn't say much on the phone. Everything okay?" Brandon hesitated. "Yeah, kind of. I found an injured animal last night. Took it to the wildlife center outside of town." She raised an eyebrow. "You? Out in the woods? With who?" He paused. "Just some guys. It wasn't planned." "Which guys?" He didn't answer. She sighed. "Brandon, I get that you're figuring stuff out, but I need to know if you're safe. You're not in trouble, are you?" He met her gaze. "Not yet," he said quietly, "but I think I would be if I didn't try to make things right." That answer hung in the air like dust in sunlight. Lacey frowned but didn't push further. She'd seen that look in her son's eyes before, when he was 4 and had brought home a hurt frog in his hands, when he was 9 and tried to hide a stray cat in the garage. There was still something tender inside him, even if lately it had been buried under bravado and bad choices. "Well," she said softly, "do what you think is right. But just remember, fixing things starts with honesty." Brandon nodded, grabbed an apple from the counter, and headed out the door. At the Southern Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, the day had fully begun. Volunteers bustled in and out, teenagers in scrubs, older retirees carrying crates, even a boy no older than 12 hand-feeding a raccoon from a bottle. The atmosphere was quieter than a zoo, but no less alive. Melissa met Brandon at the entrance. Her demeanor was all business. "She's still sedated," she said, not bothering with a greeting. "But stable. The vet came in early. Clean break in the wing. No internal bleeding. That's a miracle." Brandon exhaled. "She's gonna live?" "Probably. She'll need weeks of care, maybe months. If she doesn't regain full wing function, she won't be releasable. That's the sad part." Brandon winced. "So she'd stay here forever?" "We don't keep non-releasables here long term. We work with sanctuaries. But yes, she'd never fly again." He looked down, shame burning under his skin. Melissa must have sensed it because she continued with less edge in her voice. "But that's not your call anymore. Your job is to help now. You ready?" Brandon nodded. She handed him a plastic apron, gloves, and a bucket filled with cleaning supplies. "Start with the songbird enclosures. Wipe down every surface, replace food trays, wear gloves, always. He didn't complain. He got to work. The hours passed slowly, but Brandon stuck with it. He cleaned enclosures, scrubbed dried droppings, filled water dishes, and carried trash to the bin behind the building. Sweat dripped down his back, and by the time he finished with the third room, he smelled like a mix of bleach and hay. Still, he didn't stop. At one point, a hawk shrieked from a nearby enclosure, and he startled so hard he dropped a tray of seed. Melissa walked in just in time to see him flinch. "Raptor section," she said, suppressing a smile. "They don't like new people." "Noted," Brandon muttered, picking up scattered sunflower seeds. When he was done for the day, Melissa handed him a small paper form. "Volunteer log. Sign it. I'll need your parents' signature, too. You're under 18. Brandon signed and tucked the form into his hoodie pocket. "Can I see her again?" he asked. Melissa nodded. 5 minutes. He stepped into the recovery room, where the little owl lay in a larger enclosure now. The wing was still bound, her breathing steady but shallow. A tag on the cage read, "Barred owl, female, patient number 221. He crouched beside the glass again. "I don't know if you can hear me," he said softly, "but I'm sorry. I really am. I shouldn't have been there. I shouldn't have let them." He trailed off. The owl didn't move, but there was something in her presence. A quiet strength, maybe, or just the illusion of forgiveness that animals seem to carry in their stillness. That night, Brandon didn't return any texts from Chase or Tyler. He turned off his phone and lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling once more. This time, he didn't feel numb. He felt responsible. The next morning at school, he saw Chase leaning against a locker near the gym. Tyler was beside him, laughing at something on his phone. Brandon walked past them without a word. "Yo," Chase called out. "You good?" Brandon turned. "Yeah. You disappeared the other night. We thought you chickened out." "I took the owl to the rescue center," he said bluntly. Chase blinked. "You serious?" Brandon didn't answer. Tyler scoffed. "Man, that thing was toast. What's the point?" Brandon stepped closer. "The point is, we shot a wild animal for fun. That's not just messed up. That's sick." Chase crossed his arms. "You think you're better than us now?" "No," Brandon said quietly. "I think I was just like you. But I don't want to be." Tyler laughed. "You going soft?" Brandon turned and walked away. He didn't look back. That afternoon, he returned to the center. Melissa greeted him with a nod, this time with a fresh pair of gloves and a new job, feeding the possums. By the third day, Brandon knew the routine. He worked. He asked questions. He read printouts Melissa gave him about bird physiology and wildlife law. He even memorized what barred owls ate and how long it took a fractured wing to heal. And each day, after his shift, he visited her. She didn't move much, but her eyes would follow him now. Slow, deliberate. And when he spoke to her, there was no judgment, no sound, just a presence. And that, Brandon thought, was more than he deserved. By the end of the first week, Brandon was coming to the center every afternoon after school. He'd bike the 6 miles on a road with no shoulder, weaving around mailboxes and drainage ditches, always arriving with a slight sheen of sweat and a half-empty backpack full of homework he never touched. Melissa, never one for praise, would simply glance at him and say, "You know where the gloves are," before handing him his task list. But it wasn't just about the work. It had become a ritual, a sort of penance, even if no one had officially asked for one. He cleaned the cages. He measured food. He organized medical supplies. He helped transport a juvenile fox to a transport team headed for a forest preserve in Tennessee. And, most importantly, to him anyway, he checked on the owl. Each day her eyes were clearer. She no longer lay sprawled in the corner of the enclosure like something broken and forgotten. Now she sat upright, her bandaged wing held tightly to her side, and though she couldn't fly, she would shuffle from perch to perch, watching every movement with quiet intensity. Melissa called her Patient 221. Brandon hated that. "She should have a name," he said one afternoon as he refilled her water dish. Melissa looked up from her clipboard. "She's a wild animal, not a pet." "I know, but she matters. Doesn't she deserve a name too?" Melissa leaned against the wall and studied him for a long moment. "What would you name her?" Brandon looked into the enclosure. The owl blinked slowly at him. "Luna." he said. Because of her eyes. They look like the moon. Melissa didn't smile, but she didn't say no either. After that, it just stuck. Even the other volunteers began referring to patient 221 as Luna. One of the interns even wrote her name in dry erase marker on the glass. Luna, barred owl, non-releasable? The question mark felt heavy. Brandon knew what it meant. He researched owl rehab every night. He read stories of birds returned to the wild, and stories of others that stayed behind forever. Some became ambassadors for educational programs. Others were transferred to sanctuaries where they would live out quiet lives in big enclosures with high perches and no skies. He wanted her to fly again. But more and more, he was starting to understand that hope needed to be rooted in reality, not fantasy. One day, while scrubbing out the raptor bath trays, Melissa approached him with a clipboard and a blank intake form. "New job," she said. "An injured crow came in this morning, found on the side of Highway 9. Broken leg, possible concussion. You're going to write up the intake." Brandon wiped his hands on a towel. "Me? You're here more than half the staff. You know the drill. You've earned some responsibility." He took the clipboard. His heart swelled a little. Not with pride exactly, but something close to redemption. "I'll do it," he said. She nodded and walked away. As he wrote down the crow's condition, time of arrival, and suspected injuries, he realized that his handwriting looked steadier than it had a week ago. His lines were clearer. Focus came easier. He was changing. And Luna, somehow, had become the compass by which he steered. One gray Saturday morning, Melissa let him help with Luna's physical therapy. It was simple. Range of motion work, guided flapping, balance exercises. They used a leather glove and a low perch. Melissa guided his hands gently, showing him how to cradle her body without pressure, how to extend the bandaged wing just enough without causing stress. "She trusts you," Melissa said under her breath. Brandon looked down at the owl. Luna's talons gripped his gloved fingers gently, her head tilted just slightly. "She shouldn't," he said. Melissa didn't answer. That same afternoon, Brandon's phone buzzed in his pocket. He hadn't heard from Chase or Tyler in over a week. They weren't the type to apologize, and he didn't expect them to. But now, on the screen, a message from Tyler lit up. "Dude, you hear about Chase?" Brandon frowned. He hadn't. He typed back. "What?" Tyler responded. "Got picked up. Cops found BBs and dead squirrels in his garage. Neighbor called it in. His dad's pissed. Talked to my mom. Said it might go to court." Brandon stared at the message for a long moment. His heart beat faster. Not out of fear, but a strange, uncertain ache. He typed slowly. "You okay?" Tyler's response was short. "Don't know." Then nothing. That night, Brandon couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at his ceiling again, just like on the first night. The shadows moved across the walls like they were alive. The air felt thick. He kept thinking about Chase, about the squirrels, about Luna. Was this justice? Was this what it looked like, or just another ripple in the pond of consequences they'd all created? Brandon didn't feel satisfaction. He didn't feel vindicated. He felt sad. Because somewhere in the middle of all of this, between hurting something beautiful and trying to heal it, he'd begun to see just how broken people could become. And that, maybe, was the scariest part. On Monday, Brandon stayed after his shift. Melissa had gone home early, and one of the college interns named Kevin was closing up. Brandon asked if he could spend a few extra minutes with Luna. "Sure," Kevin said. "Just turn off the lights when you're done." In the quiet of the recovery room, Brandon knelt in front of Luna's enclosure. She looked stronger now, alert, aware, standing tall. Her feathers were fuller, her posture prouder. He tapped the glass lightly. She turned her head and blinked at him. "I don't know what's going to happen to you," he whispered. "Maybe you'll fly again. Maybe not. But I swear to you I'm going to be there, whatever happens. You're not just some animal I hurt. You're something else." He reached out, touched the glass, and let silence settle between them. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. Somewhere in the distance, another owl, a wild one, called out, "Who cooks for you?" The sound was soft, mournful, almost like a memory. Brandon closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone. April melted into May, and with it came the thickening air of a southern spring. Rainstorms swept in and out like moods, and the trees exploded in bright green. At the wildlife center, life moved to its own rhythm. Births, deaths, rescues, releases, each day marked by a clipboard and a heartbeat. Luna's healing was slow but steady. Her wing no longer sagged to the side, and the wrapping had been reduced to a softer support brace. Melissa told Brandon she'd begun light flapping exercises, and that the bones had mended well. A small miracle considering the odds. But flying? That was still a question mark. The news had only further sharpened Brandon's sense of urgency. "I want to build her a flight pen," he told Melissa one afternoon, his eyes fierce, determined. "She needs space to test her wings, right?" Melissa tilted her head. "You've been reading again." He nodded. "I found blueprints. It doesn't have to be huge, 10 by 20. Just enough room for her to feel like she's in the air again." "Flight pens cost money," she said. "And we're not a big budget operation." "I'll build it," he said. "My uncle owns a lumber yard. I'll ask him for scraps. And I've got tools. I've built sheds before." She studied him for a long moment. "If I say yes, you'll have to follow code. Predators can't get in. Luna can't get out unsupervised. And you'll need help. Volunteers aren't supposed to handle power tools." "I'll do whatever it takes," he said. Melissa tapped her pen on her clipboard. "You'll need a supervisor. We've got a retired carpenter who volunteers on Saturdays, Henry. I'll talk to him." Brandon smiled, the first real one in weeks. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," she muttered. "Build it right, or I'll tear it down myself." The following weekend, Brandon and Henry began construction behind the center. The work was hard, digging post holes, framing the walls, installing mesh wiring. But Brandon didn't care. His hands blistered, his back ached. But every strike of the hammer felt like forgiveness nailed into place. When it was finished 2 weeks later, the staff called it Luna's Run. It wasn't pretty, but it was strong, safe, and filled with perches at varying heights. There was a soft earth floor with mulch and stone, and even a small elevated platform where Luna could rest in the open air. Brandon helped carry her out the first time, his gloved hands trembling as she shifted in his grip. She was heavier than he remembered, her feathers fuller, her eyes sharp. Melissa supervised from the gate. "Gently now, let her choose the pace." He stepped into the pen and opened his hands. Luna didn't move at first. She simply sat, eyes blinking, taking in the vastness of her new space. Then she extended her wings. They trembled. She flapped, once, twice, hopping awkwardly from his glove to a nearby branch. It wasn't flight, but it was something. Brandon held his breath as she flapped again, harder this time. A brief hover. She made it to the next perch, higher, steadier. Melissa leaned on the fence, arms crossed. Not bad for a bird with a broken wing. Brandon wiped sweat from his forehead, watching Luna as she continued her halting ascents. "She's not ready yet," he said. "No," Melissa agreed. "But she's trying." That night, Brandon stayed late. Melissa had gone home. Henry had packed up his tools. But Brandon remained, sitting outside Luna's Run, watching the owl hop from branch to branch in the fading dusk. He spoke quietly. "You know, I never really told you why I stayed." Luna shifted, but didn't look away. "The truth is, I don't think I came back to save you. Not at first. I think I came back to save me." He picked up a twig and turned it between his fingers. "I used to think I was one of the good ones. Just a quiet kid. Not a bully. Not a coward. But when Chase pointed that gun at you and I didn't stop him, I realized I was just there. Just part of the silence that let it happen." Luna blinked, head tilting with quiet awareness. Brandon leaned closer. "But silence is a choice too, isn't it?" He exhaled. "I don't want to be that person anymore." He sat in the grass until the stars came out, until Luna tucked her head under her wing and drifted into sleep. And still he stayed, as if waiting for the world to turn just slightly kinder. The next day, the county wildlife inspector arrived, a woman in a khaki uniform with a clipboard and a sharp eye. Melissa introduced her as Elaine. "She's here to assess Luna for potential release," Melissa said. Brandon stiffened. "Already? I thought she wasn't ready." "She may not be," Melissa replied, "but it's time to start the process." Elaine stood outside Luna's Run and watched her hop and flap between perches. She took notes. She checked the enclosure. Then she turned to Melissa. "Strength is improving. But she's not clearing more than 6 feet. No sustained flight. Still favoring the wing on turns. Melissa nodded. We're continuing therapy. Her attitude is solid. Good appetite. No aggression. Elaine scribbled. I'll return in 2 weeks for reassessment. If no improvement, we'll have to explore permanent placement options. Brandon's stomach sank. You mean she'll never fly again? Elaine didn't sugarcoat it. Maybe. That's how it goes sometimes. When she left, Melissa turned to him. You okay? I thought she was getting better. She is. But not every bird recovers. Not fully. Luna might have to live in captivity. Brandon looked toward the flight pen, where Luna perched in the sunlight. She was never meant to be caged. None of them are, Melissa said quietly. That night, Brandon found himself standing outside Chase's house. He hadn't planned to come. His legs had carried him there like a current. The driveway was empty. The porch light was off. Still, he knocked. A few seconds later, Chase opened the door. His face was pale, hollow, angry. What do you want? He said. Brandon swallowed hard. I heard about the squirrels and the BBs. Chase sneered. Let me guess. You want to rub it in? No, Brandon said. I just wanted you to know. I didn't tell anyone. Not the cops, not the center. It wasn't me. Chase blinked. Then who? Don't know. A neighbor, probably. Doesn't matter. They stood in silence for a long time. Chase crossed his arms. You still playing nurse for that owl? She's alive because I did. Another long pause. I didn't think it would hit her, Chase said. I thought it'd scare her, I swear. Brandon didn't respond. Chase's voice cracked. I didn't mean to kill anything. You did. Chase looked away. Brandon stepped off the porch. I'm not here to forgive you, he said. I'm not even sure I forgive myself, but if you want to change, I can show you where to start. He turned and walked away, not waiting for an answer. Behind him, Chase didn't follow. But for the first time, he didn't shut the door either. The second wildlife assessment came exactly 14 days later. Brandon had counted each one. In that time, Luna had improved marginally. Her flight was still short range, but now she could reach the top perch of her enclosure without stumbling. Her grip had strengthened, and she began turning her head at sounds with the sharpness of an alert predator. But she still couldn't glide, not more than a few seconds. Melissa didn't offer hope or discouragement. She simply observed. That was her way. Brandon, however, was not so stoic. Every morning he found himself dreading the possibility of Elaine's return, afraid that the next clipboard checkmark would seal Luna's fate. When Elaine arrived again, her uniform looked more worn, and her expression more guarded than before. She didn't waste time on greetings. She went straight to Luna's run, watched the owl's movements, jotted down notes with mechanical efficiency, and then turned to Melissa. Still limited vertical lift, she said. Right wing weaker than left on extension. Attempted glide was partial. Distance and control inadequate for safe wild release. Brandon approached. He hadn't meant to speak, but the words forced their way out. What if we gave her more time? Elaine turned, surprised. You're one of the volunteers? Yes. She nodded slowly. Look, I understand how hard you've worked, but recovery has a timeline and we have limited resources. We can't keep every non-releasable bird indefinitely. Brandon's chest tightened. So what happens to her? Elaine looked to Melissa. Melissa answered quietly. She goes into permanent care, if a sanctuary has space. If not, we apply for humane euthanasia. The world tilted slightly. Brandon felt the heat rise behind his eyes. No, he said, voice firm. That's not fair. Elaine sighed. You're right. It's not. But it's reality. Sanctuaries are full. Non-releasable raptors need space, care, and funding most places can't afford. I'll find one, Brandon said. I'll call every sanctuary in the country if I have to. Melissa raised a brow. You're 16. 17. Elaine spoke gently. We can give you a week. That's not standard, but, given the circumstances, and her progress, I'll delay the decision. Brandon nodded. A week is all I need. For the next 6 days, Brandon lived 2 lives. One at school, where his grades slipped, his teachers raised eyebrows, and Tyler had stopped talking to him entirely. The other at the wildlife center, where he cleaned, fed, and worked with Luna, then spent his evenings cold-calling sanctuaries across the country. Each one gave the same response. We're full. We're not taking barred owls at this time. We can't take another permanent placement. Some never returned his messages. Others offered polite condolences. A few told him euthanasia wasn't cruel, that it was kind when freedom was impossible. He refused to believe that. On the 6th night, he stayed late, head resting on the center's front desk, surrounded by a list of numbers and chicken scratch notes. Melissa entered quietly and stood beside him. "You've called 27 sanctuaries," she said. 31, he corrected without looking up. She placed a mug of tea beside him. "You've done more than most adults would." "It's not enough," he whispered. "She didn't ask to be here. I put her here. Me. Chase pulled the trigger, but I let it happen." Melissa sat down. "You also saved her. Gave her a name. Built her a home. That counts for something." Brandon closed his eyes. "I don't want her to die in a cage." Melissa nodded slowly. "Neither do I." The next day, Luna flew. Not far, not high. But something shifted. It happened during her morning therapy session. Brandon stood at one end of the flight pen, glove raised. Melissa, at the other. They coaxed her with gentle clicks and hand signals. For the first few attempts, Luna only glided halfway before stopping. But then, without warning, she launched from the top perch, wings flapping hard, neck low, talons stretched, and reached Brandon's glove. She landed with precision. She held her posture steady. Melissa blinked. Brandon grinned, speechless. "She flew," he said breathlessly. "She actually flew." "Short distance, low arc," Melissa said automatically, then caught herself and smiled. "But yeah, she did." Elaine returned for an unscheduled visit the next morning. Melissa had called her the moment Luna completed her second successful flight. Brandon watched as Elaine observed, notebook in hand, posture tense. When Luna made the same journey across the pen and landed on Brandon's glove again, not flawless, not fast, but steady, Elaine said nothing. Then she finally lowered the clipboard. "She's borderline. Technically, it's still not full clearance, but the improvement is significant." Brandon's heart pounded. "Does that mean—" Elaine nodded slowly. "We can authorize a supervised soft release. You'll need a tracking band, post-release monitoring, and daily visual checks. If she doesn't adapt, she'll have to be recaptured." Melissa smiled faintly. "We can do that." Brandon felt the world shift beneath him, not in fear this time, but in possibility. The release date was set for the following Saturday, just after dawn. Brandon barely slept the night before. He arrived at the center before anyone else, holding the leather transport crate Melissa had taught him to carry. Luna sat inside calmly, blinking at the sunrise. They drove 30 minutes into the hills, to a stretch of protected forest at the edge of the wildlife refuge. Brandon had picked the spot himself after hiking it with Henry. It was quiet, full of dense trees and open canopies, perfect for a cautious flyer. Melissa stood beside him at the clearing's edge. "She may fly away and never look back," she warned. "I hope she does," Brandon said. He knelt, opened the crate door. Luna didn't bolt. She stood at the edge, feathers twitching, and looked back once, a single glance that burned into Brandon's memory like a photograph. Then she launched. Her wings sliced the air, awkward at first, then stronger with each beat. She reached the nearest branch, then the next, then up, higher. Melissa shaded her eyes. "Well," she said softly, "she's airborne." Brandon laughed, breathless. And then, just as Luna reached the tree line, she vanished behind the leaves, a ghost returning to the sky. For a long while they stood in silence. "She might come back?" Brandon asked. "Maybe, maybe not. That's up to her." He nodded. Melissa touched his shoulder. "You did it." "No," he said. "She did." But deep inside, something healed. Not completely, not forever, but enough. Enough to move forward. For the first few days after Luna's release, Brandon felt like he had stepped into a different life, one where guilt didn't gnaw at his insides every waking moment. He still rode his bike to the wildlife center after school, still cleaned enclosures and prepared food, but there was a lightness in his steps now. The pen behind the building, once Luna's temporary world, now stood empty and waiting, like a chapter closed with honor. Every evening he would hike back to the clearing near the edge of the refuge where they had released her. He'd sit quietly on the log, eyes scanning the canopy for a flash of movement, a familiar flutter. Twice he thought he saw her, a barred owl perched high in the branches at dusk, but each time she flew off before he could be sure. Still, that possibility, the maybe of her survival, was enough. Word spread slowly around town about what had happened. Not the full story, but whispers. A rumor that one of the high school boys had helped rescue a wild owl. Some said he built a cage. Others said he nursed it like a pet. Brandon didn't confirm or deny anything. He just kept working. But then, 3 days after the release, he found a note in his locker. No envelope, just folded paper, black ink on ruled lines. I saw her last night, near the old quarry. She was flying. You did good. There was no signature, but Brandon didn't need one. He knew the handwriting. Chase. He folded the note carefully, placed it in his backpack, and didn't say a word to anyone. That afternoon, Melissa was waiting for him with a strange look on her face. Got a call from a local news station, she said. They want to do a segment on the center, highlight the youth volunteer program. Brandon froze. Me? She shrugged. You and Luna, yeah. They want a story. You're the story. I don't think I want to be, he said quickly. It wasn't about attention. I know that, but the center could use the exposure and the donations. A lot of our work depends on awareness. He hesitated. Do I have to tell them everything? No, just the truth, the part that matters. The news crew arrived 2 days later. A woman with perfectly curled hair and a too bright smile interviewed Melissa first, then turned her attention to Brandon. They filmed him near the edge of Luna's flight pen, now cleaned and quiet. So, Brandon, the reporter asked, holding the mic close, what inspired you to help an injured wild owl? He glanced toward Melissa, then back to the camera. I think I made a mistake, a big one, and I didn't want that mistake to be the end of something. I wanted to make it mean something. Do you think you did? He swallowed. I think I helped her fly again. That's all I ever wanted. The crew filmed B-roll of him walking the grounds, refilling water, petting a rescued goat. It felt surreal, like watching someone else step into his shoes. That night, the story aired during the local 6 o'clock segment. His mom cried. His phone buzzed with messages from classmates, some kind, others sarcastic. He didn't answer any of them. The next morning at school, a few kids nodded at him in the hall. Someone clapped him on the shoulder. A girl from his English class told him she liked owls. It was all strangely normal. Even Tyler approached him by the lockers. You really did all that? He asked. Brandon met his gaze. Yeah. Tyler looked down. Guess that's cool. Better than juvie, right? Brandon didn't reply. Tyler looked up again. Chase got mandatory counseling, community service too. His dad's making him work weekends at the vet. Brandon raised an eyebrow. Good. I was thinking. Tyler hesitated. Maybe I could come help at the center, just for a day. Not a big deal. Brandon studied him for a moment, then nodded. Ask Melissa. She doesn't bite, usually. Tyler gave a half smile. Cool. And just like that, the first crack of healing between them opened. A week passed, then another. One night, as Brandon sat on the porch finishing an overdue science project, a low, distinct sound echoed through the trees. Who cooks for you? His head shot up. He stood slowly and stepped off the porch, heart racing. He followed the sound through the backyard, past the rusting fence, into the tree line. Another hoot. Closer now. He stopped beneath a tall pine, and there she was, perched on a limb just above eye level, feathers shimmering in the moonlight. Luna. She didn't move. Neither did he. Their eyes met. No cage. No glass. Just sky and space and silence. I missed you, Brandon whispered. Luna blinked. Then she spread her wings, wide, graceful, whole, and took off into the trees, her silhouette slicing the night like a memory in motion. This time he didn't follow. He just stood there, tears streaming silently, letting the moment wrap around him like wind. The next day at the center, Melissa found him early, before any of the other volunteers arrived. I got a letter, she said, handing him an envelope. He opened it slowly. It was from a raptor sanctuary in North Carolina. They had heard the news story. They wanted to offer a summer internship to the student who rehabilitated Luna. Full program, housing included. Brandon stared at the paper, unable to speak. Melissa smiled. You said you wanted to keep helping. Now's your chance. He looked up. I've never left town before. Not really. Well, she said, maybe it's time to fly. He laughed softly, still blinking in disbelief. Do I even deserve this? Maybe not, she said, but you earned it. That night, Brandon returned to the clearing one last time before leaving town. He stood where Luna had taken flight weeks ago. The air smelled of moss and dusk. The forest pulsed quietly around him. He took a notebook from his backpack and began writing. A letter. To her. To Luna. You'll never know what you meant to me, but I hope you're out there, not in a cage, not on a perch, but in the trees, under stars, flying because you can. I'll keep going. I'll keep helping. You were my beginning. I hope I was part of your freedom. He folded the letter and placed it under a stone at the base of a tree. Then he turned and walked home beneath a sky full of owls. Brandon left for North Carolina in early June, traveling by bus through the winding Appalachian foothills. He carried a single backpack, a folder of documents from the Wildlife Center, and a notebook with a drawing of an owl on the cover. Luna. His mother hugged him tightly before he boarded, whispering, I'm proud of you. Even though her eyes were glassy with worry, it was the first time he had ever gone so far from home. No Chase, no Tyler, no Fairview High. Just dense forests, quiet trails, and a sprawling raptor sanctuary nestled between ridges, where red-tailed hawks circled above and barred owls called through the dusk like distant flutes. He spent that summer in constant motion, cleaning aviaries, recording observations, shadowing vet staff. The work was hard, but the rhythms felt familiar, even sacred. He fed kestrels and falcons, tagged a young eagle with a GPS band, and assisted with his first wild release. A great horned owl found hit by a car, now healed. Everywhere he turned, something reminded him of Luna. Her shape, her eyes, her silent strength. One afternoon, while scrubbing down an empty enclosure, the program director, a tall, serious woman named Dr. Levine, approached him. I saw your story, she said without introduction. About the owl, Luna. Brandon looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. Yeah. Tell me something, she said. Did you do it because you cared, or because you felt guilty? He paused. Both, he admitted. Dr. Levine nodded. Good. Guilt can teach, but it's not enough. What you do after guilt, that's where the truth is. Brandon didn't answer, but her words lingered with him for days. Meanwhile, back in Fairview, summer crept forward in its usual quiet way. Lawnmowers hummed. The high school remained empty and echoing, and at the Southern Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, things moved on without Brandon. Melissa missed him, though she'd never say it. The pen he built was still in use, now for a juvenile red-shouldered hawk who had crashed into a truck windshield. Several new volunteers had joined, including, surprisingly, Tyler. He came every Saturday, didn't say much, just worked hard. One morning, while disinfecting the feeding trays, he asked Melissa softly, Do you think he'll come back? She didn't need to ask who he meant. If he wants to, she said. But sometimes, the place that heals you isn't the place you stay. In early August, Brandon returned. He arrived at the Fairview bus station just as a storm was breaking, stepping off the bus into a world that smelled of wet asphalt and pine. His mother hugged him tightly again, holding on longer this time. His shoulders were broader, his voice deeper, his eyes quieter. At home, his room was just as he left it. Posters slightly curled, the same hoodie hanging off the chair. But it felt smaller now. He spent the evening walking around town like a stranger retracing his old footprints. That night he returned to the clearing near the refuge, the place of Luna's release. It had changed, subtly. The grass was taller. Some trees had dropped branches in the recent wind, but the log was still there. He sat, waited, and when the light turned gold he heard it, faint but unmistakable. Hoot, hoot, who cooks for you? He looked up, heart thudding. Perched on a nearby branch was a barred owl, moon-eyed, proud, alive. It could have been any owl, but he knew. She stayed only a moment, watching him. Then, without a sound, She took off into the canopy, wings wide and strong, disappearing into the dusk. School began again. Brandon returned to Fairview High for senior year. Some things had changed. Kids treated him with a mix of curiosity and distant respect. Others remained the same. The hallways, the buzzing lights, the teachers who still gave too much homework. Chase never came back. His father had moved them to another town, trying to start fresh. Brandon didn't ask where. Tyler stayed. He joined the environmental club, helped build a new bird garden behind the gym. Brandon and he didn't become best friends again. Too much water under that bridge. But there was understanding now, a quiet truce built on shared shame and second chances. Melissa invited Brandon back to the center once a week. He resumed his volunteer shifts with steady hands and sharper instincts. He taught new recruits how to approach birds, how to change bandages, how to sit still long enough for a scared creature to trust them. They listened. Because he'd been there. One cold October evening, a group of second graders from a local school visited the center for a field trip. Melissa led them through the building, showing them the recovery rooms and the turtle tank. But when they reached the raptor wing, she motioned to Brandon. "You want to handle this one?" He blinked. "Me?" She nodded. "You've got the story." Brandon smiled awkwardly, then stepped forward. The kids quieted immediately, their faces glowing in the amber light. He held up a photo of Luna taped to a clipboard, the only image they had, taken just before her release. "This is Luna," he said. "She was injured, badly. Someone hurt her. But she didn't give up. And she healed. And one day she flew again." A girl in the front raised her hand. "Where is she now?" Brandon smiled. "Somewhere out there. In the trees. In the sky." "Is she still your pet?" "She was never mine," he said. "She just let me help for a while." The children looked up at the picture, wide-eyed and hushed. And for the first time, Brandon didn't feel haunted by what had happened. He felt humbled, grateful, whole. Autumn rolled in quietly, brushing Fairview in gold and smoke. The trees turned copper, the days shrank. And with each change, Brandon found himself retreating more into silence. Not out of sadness, but reflection. He had changed. But change doesn't always echo. Sometimes it settles like dust, slow and unnoticed until someone points it out. "You're not the same kid," Melissa told him one Saturday, as they scrubbed empty crates behind the center. "You don't flinch when birds hiss anymore." "I used to flinch. Every time," she said, smiling. "Especially at the barn owls," he laughed. "They sound like banshees." "Exactly. And now you just nod at them like they're grumpy coworkers." He chuckled, then fell silent. Melissa glanced at him. "You okay?" Brandon looked up at the trees swaying overhead. "Sometimes I still hear her." "Luna?" He nodded. "Late at night. Or when I walk past the clearing. I can't tell if it's really her or just me wanting it to be." Melissa wiped her hands on a rag. "Maybe it doesn't matter. What matters is what she left behind." Brandon thought about that. "You mean the work?" "I mean you." Around Thanksgiving, a letter arrived at the Wildlife Center addressed to Brandon. It had no return address. Inside was a folded note and a snapshot. A blurred photo of a barred owl perched on the edge of a street lamp, wings stretched wide under the amber light of a parking lot. The note read, "Saw her again, near the school. Looked healthy, strong, C." Brandon stared at the letter for a long time. It wasn't much. No apology, no confession. Just a sighting and an unspoken hope. Still, he smiled. "Good for you, Chase," he whispered. He slipped the photo into his notebook beside the original drawing of Luna, now smudged and worn from travel and time. December came with its usual hush. Snow flurried briefly, then melted by afternoon. At the center, winter meant fewer rescues but more indoor care. Frostbitten raccoons, thin deer fawns, and the occasional confused goose. One day, Melissa handed Brandon a box of laminated ID tags. "What's this?" "Public presentations," she said. "New thing we're starting next year. Education programs at schools, libraries, town halls." He raised an eyebrow. "You want me to talk?" "People listen to stories. You've got one." Brandon hesitated. "What if they don't care?" Melissa shrugged. "Then tell them anyway." The first presentation was in January, at a small public library. Maybe 30 people showed up, most of them parents with bored kids, plus a few elderly folks who probably came for the warmth and free coffee. Brandon stood at the front of the room, hands tucked in his sleeves, heart pounding. A projector flickered behind him, casting an image of Luna's silhouette against the forest canopy. He cleared his throat. I used to be the kind of person who didn't stop bad things. I wasn't cruel. I just didn't do anything to stop cruelty. And that was almost worse. A pause, a breath. Then one night I watched someone shoot an owl, and something changed. The room was quiet. He continued, telling Luna's story, the BB gun, the injury, the choice he made to return, and everything that came after. He didn't soften the truth, didn't try to be a hero. At the end, a little boy with glasses raised his hand. Is the owl still alive? Brandon smiled. I think so. Somewhere out there. Will you ever see her again? He shook his head. Probably not. But you miss her? He nodded. Every day. More invitations followed. Word spread. Brandon spoke at 3 more schools, then at a conservation meeting in a neighboring county. People listened. They asked questions. And somewhere between guilt and grace, Brandon found his voice. Each time he spoke, he felt the weight in his chest loosen. Not vanish, but transform. Because sometimes, the scars that remind you of your worst mistakes become the very reasons you fight to do better. In March, something unexpected happened. A man came to the center with a shoebox tucked under his arm. His eyes were bloodshot. His jacket smelled of smoke. Melissa took the box from him carefully and opened the lid. Inside, a young mourning dove fluttered weakly, its wing bent at a sickening angle. What happened? She asked. The man looked at the ground. My son. BB gun. He didn't mean to. But Melissa didn't say anything. She motioned for Brandon to follow her to the intake room. As they worked, Brandon felt the memory crawl back. The weight of a wounded creature in a box. The sick thud of its fall. His breath caught. I'll take care of her, he said quietly. Melissa gave him a long look. You sure? He nodded. That dove lived. 3 weeks later it flew again. And something in Brandon did too. Spring returned. Luna never did. At least not in any way that could be proved. But Brandon still hiked to the clearing once a month. Sometimes he sat for hours. Sometimes only minutes. Always listening. One evening, just after the dogwoods bloomed, he returned to find something strange. At the base of the same pine tree, the one where he'd left his letter months ago, there was a small pile of feathers. Not blood, not violence, just feathers. Silvery, soft, unmistakably barred. Tucked beneath them, weighed down by a stone, was a crumpled piece of the very letter he had written. Only one line remained visible. I'll keep helping. He didn't know how it got there. Wind? Animals? A person? Or maybe, just maybe, her. He picked up the feathers gently, closed his eyes, and whispered the words again. I'll keep helping. Then he stood, and walked into the trees, not to chase a ghost, but to carry on a promise. The final year of high school slipped by like mist, soft around the edges but heavy with weight. Brandon walked the stage in May to quiet cheers and damp eyes. His mother cried the entire ceremony. Melissa didn't attend. She hated crowds, but left a card at the center's front desk. Inside was a single sentence. You gave something broken the chance to fly. That includes yourself. He kept that card in his wallet. When summer returned, so did his time at the Raptor Sanctuary in North Carolina. This time, not as an intern, but as an assistant wildlife tech. He was paid, given keys, trusted with intake logs, medication schedules, and even training volunteers. But he also carried a burden, one that never quite left him. Because Luna never returned. Not to the clearing, not to the center, not in the night skies above his hometown, where he used to swear he heard her wings in the branches. Some part of him had always hoped she would. Not to be caged again, not to live behind glass, but just once. A moment, a nod from the wild to say, I remember. It didn't come, and in time he learned to live with that. Because not all stories finish with reunions. Some finish with echoes. One late July evening, Brandon walked the perimeter of the sanctuary, flashlight sweeping the fence line. A storm had passed through hours earlier, leaving behind branches, puddles, and the sharp scent of ozone. He paused near the red-shouldered hawk aviary, where a new arrival, a juvenile with a clipped wing, huddled in a corner, wet but uninjured. He crouched, speaking softly through the mesh. "It's okay. You're not alone." As he said it, he realized he was no longer saying it to the bird. He was saying it to himself. Because for the first time in his life, he wasn't running from the person he had been. He was carrying him. Broken. Guilty. Trying. All the way forward. In August, Brandon was invited to speak at a regional wildlife conservation conference. Big names. Big stage. His photo had been in brochures. The title of his talk was simple. When Wings Don't Return, What We Learn from the Ones We Hurt. He nearly didn't show. Even as he stood backstage, notes trembling in his hands, he wondered what right he had to speak in front of scientists, biologists, and educators who had spent decades in the field. Then he remembered the box. The silence. The eyes that never looked away. He stepped into the spotlight and told the truth. Not a hero story. A human one. He told them how he'd stood by while something was harmed. How he couldn't fix what was broken, but tried to tend to it. How Luna might still be alive, or not. How she was never his to save, only to serve. He told them what it meant to carry guilt not as a punishment, but as a reminder. And when he finished, no one clapped at first. There was just silence. Then, slowly, they rose. Not for him, for the truth. Years passed. Brandon grew. He took a job at the same sanctuary. Then another, farther west. He studied wildlife medicine, got his license, became the kind of person people called when a wild thing lay dying in the road. And every time he carried a wounded creature in his arms, he thought of her. Of the one who'd taught him what redemption looks like when no one's watching. At 25, he returned to Fairview. The center had grown, new buildings, a renovated intake wing. Melissa was still there, older now, her hair streaked with gray, her sarcasm deeper than ever. "You survived," she said when she saw him. "You too." She showed him around, then left him alone in the back hallway. On the wall were plaques of animals who had become symbols of recovery. Raccoons, foxes, birds of prey. And there, in the center, was a photo of Luna. Underneath it read, "Patient 221, barred owl, released 2023, gave us more than she took." Brandon stood there a long time, hands in his pockets, eyes misting. Then he reached into his bag and took out a worn notebook, the one he'd carried since 17. He opened it, flipped past the sketches, the checklists, the feathers taped between pages, and he added a final entry. "She never came back, but I see her everywhere, in the sky, in the silence, in the hands of every kid who picks up a broken thing and doesn't look away. Luna flew, and I followed." He closed the notebook and walked outside.